Picture Roger Ebert in the balcony, thumbing through decades of reviews, eyes shining with the kind of wonder only the wide-open West can summon. He once wrote that a great movie is a machine that generates empathy, and the Western, his favorite American myth. Tonight we're boarding that train, counting backward through 20 pictures Ebert singled out, each one a dusty mile marker on cinema's longest trail. The Three Burials of Melquiades Estrada, 2005. Tommy Lee Jones directs and stars in a southwestern odyssey that begins with a body in the desert and ends with a pilgrimage toward grace. Ebert loved how Jones mixes loyalty and a little madness, fashioning a contemporary Western where a single dead man's dignity outweighs all the bullets Hollywood usually squanders on nameless extras. The journey across the border becomes a funeral cortege and a confession booth, forcing an arrogant Border Patrol officer to walk off his sins while the sun bakes truth out of him. Ebert felt Houston and Peckinpah hovering over the film, but he noted a gentler heartbeat beneath the grit, a belief that the West is still writing its own code of honor. Dead Man, 1996. Jim Jarmusch paints the frontier in ghostly black and white, then sends Johnny Depp drifting through it like a mortally wounded poet. Ebert called the film strange, slow, unrewarding, yet he couldn't shake its hallucinatory spell. The West here is a limbo where railroad barons quote Blake and Marshall's hunt men for sport. Every campfire sparks questions about identity, purpose, and who really owns the land. Even Ebert's misgivings reveal the movie's power. Dead Man gives you time to think, he wrote, because its silences echo louder than gunfire. Like a fever dream whispered by a dying cowboy, it reminds us that great westerns sometimes hurt before they heal. Dances with Wolves, 1990. Kevin Costner's 3-hour epic was released when pundits insisted the Western was dead. Ebert saluted its vision and ambition, marveling at how the film asks for our patience and then rewards it with intimacy. A Union soldier's lonely fort, the hush of prairie grass, the first fragile handshake between enemies, faded to become friends. What moved him most was the movie's empathy, its insistence on seeing the Sioux not as stock villains or noble abstractions, but as people with jokes, grief, and complicated diplomacy. By the time John Dunbar rides into the snow to save a buffalo hide ledger of memories, we feel the century pivot under his horse's hooves. The frontier is ending, Ebert noted, but cinema finds new space in the emotional wilderness it leaves behind. Ride the High Country, 1962. Sam Peckinpah's first masterpiece watches two aging lawmen escort a shipment of gold down a mountain and measures their souls on every switchback. Ebert often cited the film as proof that greatness can bloom quietly. Its box office was modest, yet critics saw a director announced in thunder. The moral divide between Joel McCrea's steadfast Steve Judd and Randolph Scott's temptable Gil Westrom mirrors a nation wrestling with its own honor code in 1962. When Judd vows to enter his house justified, Peckinpah sketches a eulogy for the straight-arrow cowboy and a birth certificate for the conflicted anti-hero who would stalk later films like The Wild Bunch. Riding the high country, Ebert believed, meant choosing altitude over appetite, even if the air grows thin. Johnny Guitar, 1954. Nicholas Ray's Technicolor fever dream explodes every Western cliché in a hail of incendiary dialogue and erotic standoffs. Ebert reveled in its blatant psychosexual melodrama, masquerading as a six-gun showdown. Joan Crawford's Saloon Queen Vienna doesn't just wear pants. She owns the railroad, the river, and the narrative, forcing gunfighters to orbit her like jealous planets. Sterling Hayden's mysterious guitarist, trailing a past as tangled as his chords, becomes the calm amid Vienna's wildfire war with the town's Puritan enforcers. Ray shoots faces in colossal close-up, as if the landscape of guilt and desire were carved into cheekbones instead of canyons. For Ebert, this was a Western that bled lipstick red and nuclear sunset orange, proof the genre could house operatic passions without losing its boots. Shane, 1953. From the moment Alan Ladd's lone gunfighter reins in beneath the Grand Tetons, Roger Ebert argued that Shane feels as inevitable as a Greek tragedy. The film opens like a prayer whispered by a child and closes like a funeral hymn. yet every breath in between throbs with possibility. Ebert loved how George Stevens slows the West to a hush. The rhythmic clang of a hammer mending a fence, the sigh of wind through grass, the soft rustle when Marion Starrett's fingers linger just a moment too long on Shane's arm. Tension never explodes in one grand gesture. It accumulates grain by grain until Jack Palance's black-clad Wilson rides in like death itself. For Ebert, the climactic duel isn't about bullets, but reckonings of class, of manhood, of a boy's worship colliding with his first glimpse of moral ambiguity. When Joey cries, "Shane, come back!" the critic heard the West itself begging its mythic hero to remain, even as civilization nudges him toward the horizon. That fading figure, haloed by sunset dust, encapsulates Ebert's conviction that great westerns leave you haunted by what can never be reclaimed. Red River, 1948. Ebert called Howard Hawks' cattle drive epic majestic, not for its vistas, though they sprawl like an Old Testament mural, but for its raw father-son psychology. John Wayne's Tom Dunson muscles destiny with iron will, while Montgomery Clift's Matt Garth tempers iron with empathy. The Chisholm Trail becomes a 1,000-mile proving ground where authority, like restless longhorns, threatens to stampede. Ebert marveled at Hawks's knack for detail, the crack of a bullwhip at dawn, the cook's coffee sizzling over mesquite, the whispered mutiny that rattles tin cups long before guns. Yet what gripped him most was the terrifying close-up of Wayne's eyes when Matt dares to seize command. The gaze, Ebert wrote, of a man who would shoot his own legacy rather than lose it. The showdown that follows, fists flailing amid stampeding emotions, resolves not with death, but an embrace suggesting love as the West's truest frontier. For Ebert, Red River endures because it understands that taming land was easy compared with taming pride. In that final, dusty handshake, he saw Hawks arguing that America would eventually outgrow Gunsmoke, but only if its fathers could bless the futures they no longer controlled. Stagecoach, 1939. John Ford's breakthrough isn't merely the film that minted John Wayne a star. Ebert hailed it as the Western that taught all the others how to breathe. Ford stocks a single stage with America's clashing archetypes: prostitute, gambler, drunkard, banker, outlaw, and then rattles them through Monument Valley until manners crack and souls emerge. Ebert adored the way Ford splices breakneck chase with chapel quiet interludes, a lullaby drifting over squeaking harnesses, the doctor's trembling hand before surgery, Dallas's shy glance when the Ringo Kid gently lifts her down from the coach. That iconic tracking shot of Wayne twirling his Winchester, Ebert noted, introduces not a man, but a moral center, an axle around which the story must now rotate. Danger multiplies mile by mile. Apaches on the ridges, a baby's imminent birth. But the film's genius lies in revealing courage as communal rather than solitary. By the time the cavalry trumpet pierces the desert roar, the outcasts have become a family worth saving. Ebert argued that Stagecoach proved westerns could juggle social critique, romance, and Hitchcockian suspense without dropping a single horseshoe. Everything that rode out later, from High Noon to Star Wars, still drags dust kicked up by this coach. Rio Bravo, 1959. If High Noon is a ticking clock, Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo is a lazy afternoon that suddenly grips like a vice. Ebert loved Hawks' contrarian swagger. Instead of a lone marshal begging townsfolk for aid, Sheriff Chance already has allies: an alcoholic deputy, a gimpy codger, and a cocky kid. Yet none of them fit the mythic mold. What fascinated Ebert was the film's patient confidence. We loiter in the jailhouse trading jokes, strum guitars with Dean Martin, even pause for Angie Dickinson's come hither banter, all while ruthless gunmen tighten their siege. Hawks turns suspense inside out. By slowing tempo, he magnifies every creak of floorboard and flick of cigarette ash. Ebert singled out the scene where Martin's recovering drunk fumbles a shotgun shell, an entire redemption arc in 5 silent seconds. When fireworks ignite the final showdown, it feels less like genre obligation than earned catharsis for a gang that relearned self-worth. Ebert argued that Rio Bravo's secret hero is friendship itself, the notion that standing shoulder to shoulder against chaos is the West's richest currency. Watching Wayne tip his battered hat at dawn, Ebert wrote, "You sense the frontier isn't a place at all. It's the space between people who refuse to break faith." The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. Roger Ebert considered this John Ford elegy the Western that closes the coffin lid on its own legend. Filmed in austere black and white, it strips away Monument Valley's spectacle to scrutinize the myths scribbled in its dust. James Stewart's Ransom Stoddard arrives with law books, only to collide with Lee Marvin's feral Liberty Valance and John Wayne's obsolete gunfighter Tom Doniphan. Ebert admired Ford's ruthless geometry: 3 men, 1 street, a single lamplight whose shadows expose every lie. The famed duel, shot through gauzy smoke, poses the riddle at cinema's heart. Do we print the legend or face the facts? Ebert called the aftermath a moral hangover, noting how Stoddard's political ascent rests on a bullet he didn't fire, while Doniphan slinks into oblivion like a wounded coyote. Yet the film's tenderness moved him equally. Vera Miles arranging a cactus rose on Doniphan's coffin, Stewart's voice cracking on the word friend. Ford suggests that democracy itself may be a campfire story we tell to survive the dark. For Ebert, the reporter's decision to burn his notes isn't cowardice but acknowledgement that stories shape nations more than statutes ever will. When the conductor says, "Nothing's too good for the man who shot Liberty Valance," Ebert heard both a salute and a eulogy for heroes and for the West that needed them. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971. Robert Altman called his snow-draped anti-Western a tone poem, and Roger Ebert agreed, naming it the rare perfect film that yearns for love and home that will never come. Gambler John McCabe rides into a Pacific Northwest mining camp with big-top swagger, but Altman buries him in blizzards of candle smoke, muttered deals, and Leonard Cohen laments. Ebert adored the way Altman smothers genre bravado beneath slushy streets and overlapping dialogue. Every barroom boasts 6 conversations, none heroic, all half-heard like rumors in falling snow. Julie Christie's opium-sipping madam isn't a frontier angel. She's capitalism's clearest-eyed realist, charging premiums for warmth the frozen men can't buy elsewhere. When corporate gunmen arrive, the film doesn't build toward a high-noon quick draw. It wanders into a bleak cat and mouse through boarded sidewalks, church rafters, and finally deep drifts where McCabe's heavy fur coat turns from armor into shroud. Ebert argued the movie's heartbreak lies in its refusal to mythologize. Imperialism, he wrote, requires neither white hats nor black, only ledgers. Yet in the final shot, Christie adrift in narcotic fog while bells ring feudal alarms, Altman finds fragile lyricism. That tolling suggests the West's true elegy was whispered not over wide deserts, but in cramped rooms where dreamers realize nobody builds paradise on credit. The Searchers, 1956. John Ford floods Monument Valley with technicolor glory, only to plant a thorn in its center. Ethan Edwards, the most haunted rider John Wayne ever played. Scenes of magnificence, Ebert wrote, hang beside a portrait of racism so stark it makes the hero an uneasy figure. The 5-year odyssey to rescue young Debbie is filmed like a wrathful pilgrimage. Dust storms devour the horizon, Comanche war songs echo through crimson dusk, and each seasonal dissolve hints at how vengeance petrifies into creed. Ebert admired Ford's unflinching gaze. The camera pushes past the doorway as massacred homesteads smolder, but it also pauses for tender rites. A Confederate cloak draped over a child's shoulders, a lullaby hummed in candlelight. Ethan's final choices reverberate like rifle shots. Will he slaughter his tainted niece, or spare her and shatter his own credo? Ford resolves the question with a ballet of silhouettes, framing Ethan outside the door he can never cross. For Ebert, that swinging portal is the Western's hinge between myth and history. Civilization welcomes the saved child, yet banishes the savior whose soul remains too scorched to fit inside. The last image, Wayne cradling his arm like a wounded wing before turning into endless light, haunted Ebert as proof that some journeys, however triumphant, cannot lead home. Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Sergio Leone opens with silence so loud you hear windmill blades groan, a fly buzz, water drip, then a train screeches in, carrying death and destiny. Ebert marveled at the wealth of detail a Paramount budget let Leone pour into every frame. A living West swirls around the gunfighters like dust around spurs. Henry Fonda shatters decades of heroic image as icy killer Frank, his baby blue eyes now cold moons over scorched earth. Opposite him stands Charles Bronson's harmonica-playing revenant, a man whose every note is a countdown. Claudia Cardinale's Jill arrives to claim railroad riches, but discovers the frontier ranks desire above deeds. Her survival depends on reading predators as shrewdly as they read land deeds. Ebert thrilled to the film's operatic patience. Duels stretch until landscape itself seems to inhale. Morricone's score layering bone-deep lament over rattlesnake tension. When the climactic flashback finally reveals why Bronson's harmonica sounds like a dying child's breath. Revenge transcends cliché. It becomes cosmic accounting, the past foreclosing on the present. Leone, said Ebert, crafts a Western both elegiac and colossal, less hokey and more believable than earlier epics, yet still mythic enough to feel carved from canyon walls. In its closing crane shot, tracks glinting toward horizons industry will tame, Leone leaves us grieving the wild music progress must silence. The Wild Bunch, 1969. Sam Peckinpah detonates the Western, frame by shattering frame, then forces us to sift moral shrapnel. Critics slammed the excessive violence, Ebert observed, while admirers hailed a statement against violence, the carnage functioning as vaccine against bloodlust. Aging outlaws, Pike Bishop and Dutch Engstrom lead their gang into a last score on the eve of World War I, already dinosaurs before tanks. Peckinpah films their robberies like funeral marches. A children's chorus echoes over Gatling fire, slow motion turns collapsing bodies into tragic ballet. Ebert argued the chaos reveals character, Pike's half-limp dignity, Angel's doomed idealism, Thornton's reluctant pursuit. Between bullets, Peckinpah lingers on tequila toasts, river baths, and a prostitute's weary smile, insisting human warmth persists, even in hell. The final walk into Mapache's fortress, dust swirling, drums pounding, felt to Ebert like warriors embracing extinction with eyes open. After the last gun falls silent, scavenger kids fight over a broken Gatling, mocking notions of noble violence. Ebert concluded Peckinpah's masterpiece neither glorifies nor condemns. It mourns. The West it shows is a land where progress breeds bigger graves, and loyalty remains the sole currency worth dying for. In the drifting laughter of survivors, he heard history's bitter verdict. Civilizations change uniforms, not appetites. All were forgiven, 9 in 92. Clint Eastwood rides into his own legend and shoots holes through it. A stake in the heart of the Western. Ebert called this stark saga that exposes murder's cost in trembling flesh and crippled souls. Former killer William Money now farms mud and lectures piglets on virtue. Yet one rainy night, a bounty drags him back across the line he buried beneath his wife's grave. Eastwood films Kansas plains like Twilight Purgatory. No blazing sunsets, only sickly dawns revealing what past sins the dark concealed. Ebert praised how every trigger pull echoes. A giggling cowboy watching his friend bleed to death grows gray with shock. Money vomits after first shot, whiskey scouring cowardice into courage. Gene Hackman's Little Bill builds a house crooked as his justice, preaching order while branding grief on women's faces and legend-hungry biographers alike. When Money finally strides through the saloon, rain dripping off shotgun, eyes furnace black, Eastwood fulfills and dismantles myth in one cold breath. The slaughter ends, but Ebert noted the camera refuses catharsis. Money's silhouette merges with black horizon, leaving only the rattle of riders chasing coin and story. The closing title cards offer neat epilogue, yet the film's last whisper is Eastwood's. Heroes are carved by those who never saw the blood pool under the floorboards. True Grit, 1969. Roger Ebert first saw John Wayne charge the outlaws with reins in his teeth and two guns blazing, and the preview audience actually applauded. That single image, he wrote, distilled 40 years of Wayne's stardom into the presence, an archetype who could thunder across a meadow and still feel as familiar as a campfire tale. tale, yet what delighted Ebert most was the film's buoyant Huck Finn spirit. Mattie Ross, all of 14 and armed only with ironclad grammar, hires one-eyed U.S. Marshal Rooster Cogburn to avenge her father, and their odyssey through Indian territory becomes, in Ebert's words, an American Odyssey. Equal parts horse-trading comedy, gothic chase, and frontier coming-of-age. Director Henry Hathaway frames snowy ridges like storybook illustrations, but lets mud spatter every buckle to remind us the West was work. Wayne, meanwhile, doesn't merely reprise past roles. He gathers them into a single, genial avalanche of roughshod grace. Ebert called True Grit the Western you should see if you only see one Western every 3 years, because it proves morality can gallop as hard as any posse and still circle back for a joke. Beneath the crackling gunfire lies an unexpected warmth, the sense that courage, like good soil, renews itself every time a stubborn youngster plants new stakes in it. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969. Ebert's 1969 review admits it straight up. The finished film felt slow and disappointing, buried under production dollars and William Goldman's breezy banter. Yet even in disappointment, he couldn't ignore the electricity when Paul Newman and Robert Redford lit up the screen, or the daring structure that replaced dusty town shootouts with a super posse chase that rumbles like oncoming modernity. Those flaws, he suggested, revealed a bittersweet truth. The Old West was already an antique postcard by the time these two charming bandits wrote it. And that is precisely why the movie endures. Every sun-flared freeze frame or sepia newsreel feels like an elegy typed on buttersoft stationery. Handsome, self-conscious, doomed. Ebert saw in George Roy Hill's Bolivia sequence a ghost of Bonnie and Clyde, another crime ballet where style kisses history goodbye. But he also treasured the film's glimmers. Sundance's silent standoff in a bar, Butch's comic coup over mutinous outlaws, and the lovers' carefree bicycle ride scored by Bacharach's Pop Sunshine. Those fragments, he wrote, revealed the bones of the good movie that could have been made. Half a century later, audiences treasure the bones precisely because they show through the skin, like relics unearthed from a prairie grave, proof that charisma sometimes outruns perfection. In Ebert's accounting, Butch Cassidy survives because legends often bloom from beautiful misfires, the kind that leave smoke rings of charm long after the last bank explodes. The Sinoon, 1952. Ebert revisited Fred Zinnemann's real-time showdown while curating his great movies series, and shocked readers by rejecting it. Screening the film anew, he found it just not a very good film, preferring Hawk's Red River for moral complexity. Yet that very skepticism makes its inclusion here irresistibly instructive, because Ebert's critique illuminates why High Noon still sparks debate like flint on steel, where admirers see Gary Cooper's Marshal standing alone against cowardly townsfolk, a parable of conscience under McCarthy-era pressure. Ebert saw a schematic fable whose citizens felt oddly inauthentic. Chicken-livered yellow sons of bitches, as John Wayne once scoffed. The disagreement matters, he argued, because it reveals how Western myths bend beneath the weight of historical context. If High Noon sometimes buckles, the fault lines show us where civic ideals crack under fear. Even Ebert conceded the film's ticking clock structure remains brilliant. Each shadow on the sundial tightens suspense like a noose, the train whistle slicing noon like judgment's trumpet. Dmitri Tiomkin's ballad drifts over empty streets like a hymn for abandoned duty, and Cooper's weary eyes register the cost of standing upright when neighbors peel away. By challenging rather than canonizing the film, Ebert invites us to look harder at our own moral reflexes. Do we side with the marshal because he's right, or because we secretly fear we'd be hiding in the saloon? In that mirror lies High Noon's enduring gunpowder, still ready to spark after 70 years. My Darling Clementine, 1946. John Ford's most lyrical Western opens with Wyatt Earp asking, "What kind of town is this?" And Roger Ebert answered, "It's the crucible where law, love, and death swirl like dust devils on Main Street." Ford trades headline spectacle for porch swing intimacy. Before the OK Corral erupts, we linger on haircuts, church dances, and Doc Holliday finishing Hamlet's soliloquy over spilled whiskey. That attention to everyday rhythm, Ebert argued, makes the eventual gunfire feel like thunder punctuating a lullaby. Henry Fonda's Wyatt tilts back in a chair, tapping a veranda post with boot heels while thinking of Clementine. In that small, wordless sway, Ebert saw the entire promise of civilization glimmering in a gunslinger's grin. The showdown itself is almost anticlimactic, filmed at dawn with dog barks echoing like distant bells, because Ford, Ebert wrote, cared less about who draws first than who builds the first schoolhouse afterward. Even the villainous Clantons emerge as weather-beaten men rather than cardboard fiends, suggesting chaos is the West's natural climate until someone dares to plant order. In Ebert's eyes, My Darling Clementine is a hymnal, verses of regret, refrains of hope, a final shot of the schoolmarm signaling that the future will be written in children's handwriting, not bullet holes. Watching Fonda tip his hat goodbye, Ebert felt the West exhale as if acknowledging that romance and responsibility can share the same horizon, one stepping forward, the other riding off in silhouette. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. When Ebert named Sergio Leone's epic a great movie, he marveled that a tale shot on low budgets in southern Italy could reinvent an entire genre. Plot, he said, was a skeleton. The real flesh lay in Leone's cathedrals of sound and silence, close-ups of dust-caked faces, cannons rumbling beneath spur jingles, Ennio Morricone's coyote yodel theme slicing open the desert sky. Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach don't simply play gunslingers. They orbit a buried cache of gold like rival planets, tugging each other off course. Ebert adored how Leone turned every duel into a symphony movement, the camera circling, eyes narrowing, sweat beating until time itself seems to gasp before the shot. He noted, too, the film's mordant humor, the legless beggar demanding whiskey, the bridge-blowing soldiers too drunk on futility to care who wins the civil war raging around them. In that nihilistic laughter, Ebert sensed a critique sharper than any sermon. Greed endures beyond flags, and survival often chooses the least saintly prophet. Yes, the movie may be 30 minutes too long, he conceded, but excess is the point. The West, as Leone imagines it, is a cosmic joke told at operatic volume. By crowning The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly his greatest Western, Ebert saluted a film that exposes myth, exalts style, and still leaves room for the cackle of a one-armed undertaker counting coins while kingdoms crumble. The horizon here is endless, exactly wide enough to hold both grandeur and graveyard dust.